My name is Bill Jackson, and I am a veteran of the Nike guided missile system. I was stationed at Fort Hancock from 1968, really until the 1974 when the base was closed. My compadre here, he had really tough duty. I'll let him announce where he was stationed.
Stationed at a little town in California. You might have heard of it. It's called Malibu. I was there from 1968 to 1970. And I took care of all the radars and anything else that broke down on this site. They sent me to 45 weeks of school, and I had on a 3-year enlistment, sent me to Malibu.
All right, I was actually down on the system working with the missiles. I was started out as a launcher crewman and rose to the position of a section chief. Nike system was deployed in 1974 and 1954 and lasted for 20 years. 1974 when it was finally declared obsolete and dismantled. Next chart. The Nike family consisted of the first Nike missile was the Nike Ajax. This is the Nike Ajax. It's 2-stage missile. First stage, the booster here, solid fuel. Second stage, the actual guided missile itself, liquid fuel. Carries a high explosive warhead, has a range of 35 miles. Got a service ceiling of about 70,000 feet, and it could reach speeds in the neighborhood of about 1,700 miles an hour. Second generation of this one here was active from 1954 to the latter part of 1959, early 1960 time frame, when it was replaced by the second generation Nike missile, the Nike Hercules. The Nike Hercules is again a 2-stage missile, but both stages this time are solid fuel. The Nike Hercules has a range of approximately 100 miles, service ceiling in excess of 150,000 feet, and it can reach speeds in excess of 2,700 miles per hour. Nike Hercules had the capability of carrying either a high explosive warhead or a nuclear warhead. During my tenure at Fort Hancock, we were not allowed to disclose what was out there, but now it's so far in the past. I can tell you now, all 24 of the Nike Hercules we had out there, every one of them was armed with a nuclear warhead. The smallest warhead had a yield of 2 kilotons. The largest had a yield of 40 kilotons. And we had an intermediate size that we still consider the large that had a yield of 20 kilotons. Give you a frame of reference, the nuclear devices dropped on Japan at the close of World War II. Those devices had yields in the range of about 14 to 17 kilotons. So what we had out there was substantially greater explosive power. Next one. This is how the system worked. The first radar that we had down on Sandy Hook, or really on any actual firing unit, Nike firing unit, first radar that's going to pick up the target is the high power acquisition radar. It's got a range of approximately 225 miles. It's a sweep radar, constantly rotates, sweeping the sky. It's going to feed information about the target to the computer system. The next radar that we had that was going to pick up the target was the low power acquisition radar, or LOPAR. It's got a range of 140 miles. And again, it will be supplying data to the computer. Once the target is within range of our 2 target-oriented radars, the target tracking and target ranging radars, those 2 radars will lock onto the target and begin to track that target across the sky. They are going to provide more precise positioning information about that target to the computer. In the meantime, the missile tracking radar would have locked onto the missile that was going to be fired. These 3 radars, the target tracking, target ranging radar, and missile tracking radar, are not sweep radars like the 2 acquisition radars. Rather, these radars act more like a spotlight. Imagine an actor on the stage as he maneuvers back and forth across the stage, how that spotlight stays locked on him and tracks him every step he takes. That is what these 2 radars will do. Target-oriented, tracking the target, missile tracking, tracking the missile. At the appropriate time, the missile would be launched. The booster would ignite and begin lifting the missile off the launcher. By the time the missile has traveled 14 feet, it hasn't really even cleared the erecting beam of the launcher yet. You've already broken the sound barrier. That booster is going to burn for 3.5 seconds. 3.5 seconds, it's going to lift that missile well over 150,000 feet and bring that speed up over 2,700 miles per hour. Oh, wait, I'm messing up left and right. The actual rocket motor in the missile will bring it up to that speed. That rocket motor burns for 37 seconds. Next chart. All right, this is the information I've already provided to you about the Ajax. Next chart. This is the threat we were here to counter. That is a Tu-95 Bear bomber. It's a subsonic bomber. Its top speed is in the neighborhood of about 550 miles per hour. Its cruising speed is more in the neighborhood of about 450 miles an hour. They used to fly this bomber up and down the east and west coasts of the United States. The range of this bomber is phenomenal. This bomber can fly about 9,000 miles on one load of fuel. During the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Soviet Union used to fly this bomber along our coast as far as their fuel would allow them. Still have enough fuel to return to the Soviet Union. Occasionally, as they made their transits, these bombers would turn and start to come in. We had radar networks that had been tracking them, and they would see those turns, and immediately we would be notified and begin preparing to engage. Next chart. This is a Tu-95 Bear bomber. It's an ugly looking beast, but this is their version of our B-52. It is still in use today, and it's expected to continue in use until the year 2040. In fact, they are still tickling our borders, ours, Canada, Great Britain, tickling those borders. And we're regularly having to send up fighter interceptors to nudge them away. Next chart. This film is a film clip of a Nike Ajax missile being elevated, getting ready to launch. There it is. That was a test fire of a Nike Ajax, and it was a successful mission. Took out that remote controlled obsolete B-17 bomber. Background on the Tu-95 was first flown in 1952. It entered their bomber force in 1956 and has been their mainstay for their bomber force really till today. And this plane was the plane that carried and tested the Soviet Union's largest nuclear device, the Tsar Bomba. It was a 50 megaton hydrogen bomb, and that was done in 1961. Next. Nike Hercules, 41 feet long, over 5 tons, almost 5.5 tons. And believe me, 2 men could move that missile very easily, the way it was perfectly balanced on its handling rail. Yeah. Got a range of 100 miles. And like I said, the service ceiling was in excess of 150,000 feet. There are all the warhead yields. Next. This is a film clip showing an intercept of an unmanned aerial vehicle or drone as a test. Drone is being carried airborne by an Air Force bomber. All right, the drone's been released. And that's our target. This test looks like it was made at White Sands Missile Range. Probably in the latter part of the 50s, just before they just started deploying the Hercules. This chart here shows all of the Nike bases that we had surrounding major metropolitan areas in the lower 48. We also had Nike bases in Hawaii, we had them in Alaska, and we had them in Greenland. I would not have wanted duty in either Greenland or Alaska. You'll see the bulk of the sites appear to be in this northeast quadrant of the United States, from Boston down to Washington, D.C. However, as you can see, every major metropolitan area is surrounded by these missile bases. Next. This is the New York defense area, starting here at Sandy Hook, going around the Bayshore area, up into suburban northern New Jersey, into southern New York, and then out onto Long Island. Disregard these two up here. They are part of the Providence, Rhode Island, Hartford, Connecticut defense. Originally, we started with 19 Ajax bases that surrounded New York. When they made the conversion from Ajax to Hercules, not all of those bases converted. Only 10 did. The other 9 phased out over a very short period of time. Next chart. This is the high power acquisition radar. This is the radar that's going to be the first one to pick up the target. Next chart. This is the low power acquisition radar. Next chart. All right, this is a target tracking radar. It's in rather sad shape. We have repainted it since this photo was taken. Next chart. This is the target ranging radar right here. And you can see the appearance is very similar between all these radars. Last one. This is the missile tracking radar. They all look very similar in appearance, and they all operate in a similar fashion. Next one. Okay, this is Kevin's very, very tough duty station. He was a radar repairman in Malibu. Next. This is what one Nike launching section looked like. We built this diorama because we can't take anyone down into our launching area anymore. It was devastated by Superstorm Sandy. It is just too unsafe. So we have this built so that everyone can get a good idea of what a launching section looked like and an idea of what transpired down there. The magazine, you would have 6 missiles stored in the magazine. 6 men were required to run a mission. Crewmen's 1, 2, 3, and 4, panel operator, and section chief. Next. Oh, that's another shot of them. You always had 3 launchers that were mounted topside. You had one that was on the centrally located elevator that brought the missiles up. So you would always have 4 missiles to, for any mission or drill. Next. Battery control van. Inside this battery control van, you had an analog computer, the battery commander or the battery control officer, not necessarily the battery commander, would be sitting inside there. You had an acquisition radar operator, the high power or high and low power radar operator. The computer operator also operated the switchboard, and we had a plotting board operator. So basically you had 5 men in this van, and believe me, it gets crowded in there, very tight. Next one. This is the radar control van. You had missile tracking radar console in there. You had also the target tracking console. And in there you had 3 radar operators, 1 for the missile tracking radar. And then you had 3 that operated the 2 target-oriented radars, the target tracking, target ranging radar. Those 2 radars are slaved together, so they always point at the same point in the sky. You move one radar, the other radar automatically moves to maintain that one point in the sky relationship. And then we had a tracking supervisor who would be overseeing all of the operators. And he would also be monitoring the target tracking radar scopes to identify any potential jamming of our radar frequencies. When he would see that, he would be able to change the frequency on the radar that was being affected. Next chart. Since you people are very, very close to where the Army suffered its worst accident with the Nike system, I'm sure you're going to have questions about that. It was an unfortunate incident, took place May 22nd, 1952. An entire launching section of Ajax missiles. These are the missiles that carried a high explosive warhead, none of them carried a nuclear warhead. There was an accident that resulted in the unwarranted detonation of all the missiles in that section. 8 missiles detonated almost simultaneously, killing 10 individuals, 6 soldiers and 4 Department of the Army civilian Ordnance Corps workers who had been performing a maintenance modification on the missiles. They did perform an accident investigation, but since all of the individuals in the area were dead, they were never able to definitively come to a conclusion what actually happened. They can only supposition purely. But believe me, it changed the way we did business with the Nike system from that day forward. No, they never brought more than 1 missile above ground for maintenance action at a time, where they had all of them above ground working on them. Additionally, we never did anything with these missiles or this system unless it was by the book. You always had 1 man who had the manual, and he would read each step, waiting for and then wait for the rest of his crewmen to announce that they had completed that step or check by saying, check, before you went to the next one. It had to be, everything was by the book. Next. All right, this is where the fire control was located for this Leonardo site. And here is approximately where that launching area was, where the accident took place. This now is part of Nat Earl. It was then too. This right here is now all housing. It's gone. They erected a memorial to the 10 individuals that lost their lives. Next chart. Oh, you got it. It's a little more definitive right here. This is the approximate location within that launching area. There were 3 launching sections, and the third one right here is the one that detonated. Okay. Next. This is the devastation that was wrought by that accident. Next. And you can see they're right now, they're puzzling about trying to figure out what took place. From what I understand, pieces of these missiles made it into the bay. Supposedly it broke every window in the Bayshore area. Next. Next. This is a booster. That's a booster there also. Next. All right, and this is the monument that was erected. Originally, this monument was up at our Air Defense Command Post up on the highlands, up behind the Twin Lights. It has the date and lists all the individuals that lost their lives. When they closed the Air Defense Command Post in 1974, this memorial was brought down and put on Sandy Hook at Fort Hancock and what is now named Guardian Park. Now, during my time there at Sandy Hook, I've been doing tours for 22 years. I was very surprised one anniversary date that I happened to be very near, right at Guardian Park, when a very distinguished lady, she was probably a little older than I was, pulled up, got out of her car with a bouquet of flowers, remembering her beau, Jim Marsh. She had dated Jim Marsh, and he must have been one hell of a guy because she still remembered him more than 50 years later. Next chart. All right, I'd like to thank you and invite you to come out and join us for a tour of the Nike site. We have made tremendous strides in the restoration of the site. We have completely restored an Ajax missile. We have it on display inside a building to protect it from the weather. We just opened a museum. It's filled with Nike memorabilia, test equipment, that diorama. We've got an audio-visual room there where you can sit and watch some films of launches and everything else. And these are the final 2 tour dates that we have. And our tours are from noon to, well, our last tour will start about 3:30 because we got to try and get out of there by 4. So, any questions? I will entertain any questions. Do we have any more charts? That's it. Yes, sir.
The ICBM funnels for missiles. When was it? Almost after the last night got shut down. I mean, it changed. And it did the.
When did they do what with it?
They build the missile sites for the ICBM.
Oh my goodness, they were built long before Nike, the Nike system was done away with. They were starting to test ICBMs really in the early 50s and early 60s it was. And they actually building those sites there throughout the 60s. That was one of our nuclear triads, getting those ICBMs done. And of course, we had the Polaris missiles that on the subs that were being deployed, and that was in the early 60s also. So That's one of the reasons why they did away with the Nike Hercules. The threat was changing. The threat was now not so much manned bombers, which the Hercules had originally been designed to deter, to ICBMs. They did modify the Nike Hercules to give it the capability to intercept an ICBM. We could do that. The problem is our maximum range. We'd be doing that around 90 to 100 miles from us. And the Department of Defense concluded that that is just a little too close. So they decided to phase out the Nike Hercules as part of the strategic arms limitations talks that resulted in the SALT I treaty. In the SALT II treaty, they pretty much gave up the follow-on Nike system, the Nike Zeus, or eventually it was renamed the Spartan and the Sprint. Any other questions?
A couple interesting points that you might find interesting. When I was at last commander of Fort Hancock, and I was in charge of integrated fire control area, IFC, and we had communications throughout the country with NORAD and everything, fully coordinated. Because the first line of defense, of course, was the jets that they set up. And then the second line of defense would be missiles, the ICBMs or whatever. And then we'd be like the last resort. So that we had those. And I had to have nuclear release from the president before I could open the closure to the fire button. So I had, we have this safe in the IFC with all the codes. And then I would get a code from the, it would be technically from the president, but you know, it'd be from my higher headquarters. And I would get the code, I gotta verify the code before I can unlock and the fire button. And then before, of course, I can use the fire button. And another interesting thing that at the whole time I was stationed there was, and you know, this is something you were saying is how impressive these missiles are when they come out of the ground. And it's right here in Sandy Hook, and nobody's ever been on the beach, nobody knows there. Nobody had any clue. And I would bring Boy Scout troops out and bring my missiles up for them to see. And it's like an awesome sort of thing. They all just love it. See all these huge missiles come out of the ground all together like that. And it was something that was a great experience for everybody. That's it. That's all I wanted to get.
Yes, sir.
You, if I heard you right, said the range is about 100 miles.
Yes, sir.
And you said that the nuclear, they were all nuclearly armed.
Yes.
What mitigation factors in place for fallout?
For fallout?
Yes.
Well, let me pose this to you, sir. If those bombers had gotten through and dropped their bombs, what would the devastation have been? All right. Yeah. Well, our ideal scenario, sir, was to have a high altitude detonation position so the bombers would be flying into the fireball. We would turn them into pieces less than sand. I'm talking the bombers, the people on the bombers, and the nuclear devices that they had on the bomber. Now, yes, there's going to be some fallout, but it's not going to be as bad as if the bottom of the fireball comes in contact with the surface of the earth and sucks up all kinds of debris into that fireball, irradiating that large debris and having that fall back down to earth. That debris is going to have a nuclear half-life of hundreds and hundreds of years. But debris in the form of pieces less than sand will begin degrading much more rapidly and have a much shorter half-life. Our job was to keep those bombers from dropping the bombs on the target. Yeah. Yes. Well, from the time they did away with the Nike Hercules system in 1974, you were primarily relying on fighter interceptors prayer, and mutual assured destruction. Soviet Union, you fire your missiles at us, we're going to be firing ours at you. Those two missiles will pass each other as they are on their way to their individual targets and will both destroy each other. And thank goodness, cooler heads seemed to prevail, and no one on either side took that step across the threshold into World War III.
Being an Air Force veteran, when I was stationed in Clark Air Force Base, I remember the B-52s, how they updated them. And this was in I got out in 1966. And they're still flying those B-52s with every upgraded electronic device.
Yes,
And it's an amazing plane.
it is, and
Anyone that's
it's
ever seen a B-52.
and it's still going to keep flying. I
And they
mean,
keep upgrading it, which is
yeah.
fantastic.
I mean, those planes are older than the pilots that are flying them. Their fathers flew them.
We tracked every single jet that came to any of the airports in the area, better than Nelson. So we would track them all. And I regret, I keep thinking of this over and over. You know, they didn't close the site. On 9/11, we would have seen those jets, and we could have got to them a lot faster than anybody else.
I would have to beg to differ with you there, sir. The reason being, those were all commercial airliners.
Yeah.
First line of defense was always fighter interceptors. Fighter interceptors are going to take off. They're going to see that's a commercial airliner. They're not going to shoot at it. And
Tough call.
it would, National Command Authority would have to authorize the destruction of a commercial jet.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And what the hell, you know, at that time,
Who knew?
the president, he was out of pocket. Dan Quayle, the vice president, he was arguing with some grade school kid on how you spelled potato. So really, National Command Authority could never have intervened. Would we have had the time? I don't think so. I really don't. Even if we were still fully active, ready to go, simply because those were commercial aircraft. FAA had no idea what was going on. They were completely befuddled.
Yeah. I wouldn't have got authority, but.
No. You wouldn't have wanted that on your conscience. Yes, sir. We didn't know what was going on until the first plane hit. And by then it was all too late. Yes, sir.
Besides me and Ardo, were there other sites in this general area around here where this is located? To launch from,
Yes.
and also and was it all commanded from Sandy Hook, or did they have their own individual?
Each site had their own commander, a battery commander. At the ADCAP, the Air Defense Command Post. Now, the Air Defense Command Post is controls the battle. They controlled all of the Nike bases that ring New York and Philadelphia both. Their job was to make sure that every target was addressed and no two targets were being, no two firing batteries were firing their missiles at the same target, wasting missiles. And the commander up there at the ADCAP, he outranked and actually commanded all of those missile bases. All right, so, and you had missile bases, like I said, starting at Sandy Hook, going around the Bayshore area. Originally, there were 19. One of them was the Leonardo site. You also had at Homedale and Perth Amboy and up in Watchung and going all the way up through northern New Jersey, then out southern New Jersey, southern New York, and then out onto Long Island. Some of my tour guides were stationed at sites further north in New Jersey. Some of them were out on Long Island. So, I've got a smattering of people from all over the place. And then I got this guy from.
Built part.
I want to say I remember one being.
Oh, yes, there was.
Right.
It closed before Sandy Hook's did. And the site at Perth Amboy closed before Sandy Hook did. Because during my last few years there, when we had a problem at Sandy Hook, we jumped in our truck real quick, drove all the way to the Perth Amboy, the South Amboy site, and we're scrounging up pieces or parts that we needed from there. Electric motors and such like that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
The time was the theory, one missile to take out one plane, or was it depending on how they find information?
Well, let me
One
put it,
missile to take out more than one plane.
let me put it to you this way. When it was Nike Ajax, it was one missile against one plane. And you just about have to hit that plane to knock it down. When Hercules came in, especially with the nuclear warheads, you didn't have to just about hit that aircraft. All you had to do was be in a neighborhood. When you detonated that warhead, the blast, the shock wave, the electromagnetic pulse coming off that detonation could knock planes out of the sky for miles around. So one Hercules had the capability of taking out an entire formation of planes with one missile. Now, given the different sizes of the warheads on the Nike Herc, of course, we would not fire the large 40 kiloton missile at a single aircraft. We'll use the 2 kiloton missile on him. And once we've expended that, then we'll start firing the 20 kilotons. We got a good formation of planes. It's going to be a 20 kilotons, it's going to be the 40 kiloton. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Were there regular drills performed with inert weapons to keep proficiency of the crew that would fire?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You had 3 levels of status applicable to a Nike site, a Nike battery. You had cold status. That was you were released from responsibility for engaging a target for 2 weeks. That was your opportunity to perform in-depth maintenance on the equipment, take it all apart, make sure everything's working very well. 1 week of the month, you're hot. You're the prime unit to engage a target at short notice. So you can't be taking your equipment apart. It's up, operational, ready to go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. About all you're going to do is run drill after drill after drill, maintaining your proficiency. We had firing simulators that attached to the front of a launcher, allowed us to plug the missile into this firing simulator. The firing simulator would be plugged into the launcher. That would allow us to simulate actually launching a missile and flying it out to the target and detonating it, with that missile still sitting on the launcher. So yes, we did practice a lot. And additionally, once a year, the crewmen from a Nike site would be sent down to a subsidiary range of White Sands Missile Range, McGregor Range in New Mexico, where you would spend a week. During that week, your assembly and service personnel will build a missile up from scratch. Your IFC and your launch personnel will then perform all their daily, weekly, and monthly checks. After that has been completed, then you'll run 2 missions firing missiles at unmanned aerial vehicles. Everything that you did in that week would be scrutinized by evaluators. The slightest misadjustment on the equipment, the slightest misstep, point deduction. At the end of the week, they totaled up your point deductions and subtracted it from 100. That was your score that you had to live with for the next year. Of course, nobody wanted to score poorly. You scored poorly, that's going to translate into a higher headquarters coming and camping at your missile base to perform remedial training for the next year to make sure the next time you go down there, you don't have a bad result like you just had. All right. Before I take your question, during my tenure at Sandy Hook, we fired consistently as an honor battery. That meant our score was above 92 points, 92 or better, all except once. On August, 8 August 1971, our crew down there fired a perfect score, 100%, no point deduction. No regular Army Nike Hercules battery had ever accomplished that, and it was never repeated afterward. Our battery commander was so tickled to death to be able to have this on his officer's efficiency report, his OER. He took that entire crew, about 50 or so men, took us across the border into Mexico, the only place he could afford to do this. He had drinks for the night for us and lobster dinners. And I'm not talking those rock lobsters from the Caribbean. He actually had cold water Maine lobsters delivered down there for us. And boy, we partied hardy. Sir.
When did the Soviet find out we had this system? And did they have their own?
Oh, they knew it was being built. And yeah, they knew where every one of these missile bases was located. If you don't think we wouldn't have been targeted by Soviets, of course we would have been. I wouldn't have expected our life expectancy to have been more than, I would say, half hour to 45 minutes at best before something is going to hit us. Any other question? Did they have their own system? Oh, they, whether or not they had nuclear warheads on them, I don't know. But of course, they had their guided missile anti-aircraft systems. I mean, they had a very successful shoot down in with Gary Francis Powers, the U-2 plane. That was a guided missile anti-aircraft. Probably very similar to our Ajax missile. Yes.
15 South Amwood, they have nuclear warheads?
58, 60, probably not. They would not have been part of the conversion. They wouldn't have converted and put nukes in there unless they were going to be kept open for a long period of time. I'm not sure exactly when they closed. I do know that they were closed long before us.
But Bill, also the distinction with National Guard versus regular Army.
Yes, all right.
National Guard, like, they didn't get
Eventually, yes, they did. Yes, they did. For the longest time early on, the National Guard had just the Ajax bases. Then as they closed out, they gave them Hercs, and then the actual control of the nuclear warheads remained in the hands of active Army personnel that were at that missile site. They would be the ones to unlock the safe and give the National Guard's personnel the arm plugs to arm the warheads. Eventually, though, even that changed towards the latter part. You know, we got so we could trust the National Guard, I guess. Any other questions?
Bill, Kevin, thank you very much.
I thank you for your time and attention. Any comments?
No, thanks for coming.